and welcome to The Edge. Well, we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Social media services Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram are back up and running after an outage that lasted almost 6 hours. Facebook blamed an internal technical issue, which not only affected Facebook services, but reportedly also employees' work passes and email. What was the real reason behind the outage, and should we expect similar outages in the near future? Lebanon returns to the negotiating table with the International Monetary Fund. The Lebanese finance ministry said in a statement that it had resumed interactions with the IMF and expressed willingness to progress towards reaching an agreement on an appropriate recovery programme. Are these negotiations the only way to bring Lebanon out of the financial crisis? United Nations human rights investigators say that they have found evidence of war crimes in Libya. First findings from a fact-finding mission commissioned by the Human Rights Council chronicle accounts of crimes including murder, torture, enslavement, extrajudicial killings and rape. How will the international community react to this report? These are the top 3 topics that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, has apologized for the disruption caused after its social media services went down for almost 6 hours, impacting more than 3.5 billion users worldwide. Our infographic has more. Facebook has cited faulty configuration changes on its routers as the root cause of a nearly 6-hour outage that prevented the company's 3.5 billion users from accessing social media and messaging services.
Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp lit up again after a nearly 6-hour outage on Monday. Facebook apologised and initially could not say what caused the failure. But the company later said the problem was a faulty configuration change. CEO Mark Zuckerberg posted on Facebook, quote, "Sorry for the disruption today. I know how much you rely on our services to stay connected with the people you care about." The outage was the second blow in days to the social media giant. On Sunday, a whistleblower accused the company of prioritising profit over clamping down on hate speech and misinformation. Shares fell nearly 5% for Facebook, but later rose 0.5% in after-hours trade after the platforms rebooted. Several Facebook employees who declined to be named said that they believed that the outage was caused by an internal mistake in how internet traffic is routed to its systems. Facebook lost about $545,000 in US ad revenue per hour during the outage. That's according to ad measurement firm Standard Media Index. Security experts said an unintentional mistake or sabotage by an insider were both plausible.
And I'm joined live from Londonderry in Northern Ireland by Professor Kevin Curran, who's a cyber security expert, and live from London in England by Stuart Peck, who's Director of Cyber Security Zero Day Lab. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today again on The Edge. Where to start? They're saying that this week started as a bad week for Facebook and only got worse. We should start with I guess what's the middle thing, which is the outage yesterday of Facebook services. Kevin, what is your understanding of what caused everything to go down for 6 hours yesterday?
Facebook, being such a giant, they control their own network, their autonomous system. And the backbone of the internet has about 100,000 of these autonomous systems, these networks. And the configuration meant essentially that all the routes into Facebook servers were gone, that they basically pulled the plug from the internet. And because of this configuration change, it had a cascading effect that meant all the other routers on the internet did not know that Facebook existed. And likewise, of course, Instagram and WhatsApp and some of the other services that they run, because they have them all coupled together now, so that if one change and misconfiguration happens in one of their systems, all of the three major sites go out. And we're talking about services which are there for 3.5 billion people on the planet.
And what's particularly remarkable about this, Stuart, is that it not only stopped the services from running, but it stopped the people that were trying to get into the Facebook building from getting in, because even their door passes were down. So is this irresponsible of the company not to have a secondary circuit, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, you'd expect Facebook to have a decent business continuity plan for this situation. No one actually thought that BGP, so the Border Gateway Protocol, would be on their list of things to go wrong. Everyone expects it to be, you know, DNS systems to go down and cause major outages. So this has probably raised a few things for them to think about when it comes to business continuity planning and disaster recovery. Having those systems linked and not being able to gain access to, say, the data center or access to internal systems or many other things such as the building is a major concern. And I would expect that Facebook would look at that and review their plans and plan for this accordingly moving forward.
And I imagine that this is something that should be a lesson to all businesses running large networks. And there are many lessons to be learned from this outage. Hey, Kevin, this is obviously something that could happen in any system. Do companies generally have safeguards?
Companies generally try to build redundancy into any technical solution, whether it's your mobile phone networks, whether it's broadband. You tend to have multiple servers. You try to have failovers. If one fails, another one kicks in. But there always can be a single point of failure. So, of course, what happens is Facebook actually write their own BGP, and they did an update. And somehow they just missed something, you know, which software can always happen. Software is quite complex. And sometimes it's not even, you know, well, how did this happen? It's how do networks actually work most of the time, because they are so complex. But of course, they will have to learn from this to find out, can they build more redundancy in? Do they have to offer more training? Do they have to put their changes out in future into more esteemed, you know, in other words, generally, when you do a software update, you don't roll it out live to the public. You generally test it in a small group and you see is there any bugs, and then you roll it out. But in this case, maybe they were too quick to do this. Maybe they just need more training. But of course, other companies will learn from this as well. But really, it's a problem that a lot of companies will face. In fact, you know, a lot of companies use maybe Cloudflare and all these other giants. You know, in fact, the company which routes the most traffic on a daily basis on the internet is Cloudflare, and they offer a number of services again. So they were the first to spot what happened here, and that it's their actual technical explanation that most people are going by today. But yeah, Facebook will have to learn from this, and of course, other companies will be paying close attention as well.
Now, I'm going to say something that will date me a little bit. Back in the late 1970s, my father was working for a multinational company, an American company, but from London, and he managed to crash a computer in Geneva, I guess over an ISDN link rather than what we now know as the Internet. So, Stuart, how common is it? Of course, everybody knows about this Facebook because they're either using Facebook, WhatsApp, or Instagram. How common is this sort of outage? And I know in 2019, Facebook was down for about 14 hours. Can we expect things like this to become more common?
It's not a case of it becoming more common. I think this is a particularly unique situation in terms of the outage due to the nature of the update and what it affected. But outages in companies are fairly common. There have been many cases where companies have had major outages, major platforms have outages, cloud providers have had outages. So I think this is a common thing which companies plan for. This is a common practice. You plan for availability issues, and you have a business continuity plan. You have resilience. You have backup providers. You have training. You would probably do some kind of annual testing to see how quickly you can recover from these situations. And then, as Kevin rightly mentioned, you also have, if you're running like e-commerce websites and things like this, you will have systems to make sure that you can fail over to those that will keep the site up in those kind of situations. So, it's about trying to have the right plan in place and being able to execute it. And when things go wrong, this is when these plans would kick into place. This is where these backup systems would kick into place. And when you have those kind of perfect storms, which Facebook had, that's when your engineering teams will kick in and all those plans will kick in and you're trying to troubleshoot this issue and try to get some resolution. So I think, internally, Facebook will probably be looking at this and taking some lessons away from it to try and work out how they could prevent it from happening again. But of course, there are always those gotchas in any kind of network, any kind of system where one small thing could lead to a major event happening, and some of these things get overlooked. And so we have to kind of look at having these plans and having resilience in place so we can actually fail over in those kind of circumstances.
Right. But I'm sure that if they haven't started already in the days to come, the conspiracy theorists will kick up their game and start to make suggestions. The statement from Facebook didn't rule out entirely the possibility of an external intervention in this. Kevin, do you think it's likely that this is just do you think it's possible that this was an external thing, or is it almost certainly an internal fault?
My immediate reaction was this is a configuration error, and I checked before I went to bed, and Facebook was still down, and I slept soundly, and I woke up. And of course, all the commentary was that it was a configuration error because, look, hacking happens for two reasons. Either states hack other countries for obvious reasons, or criminals do it for financial gain. Mm-hmm. Now, in this case, they were not going to get money from Facebook because it was too big, it was too specific. I mean, I just can't see where criminals come in. Yes, I mean, it's not impossible you had a disgruntled employee, but I don't believe that either. Because if you work in computer science, if you work in computer networks and you understand the sheer complexity involved, you just know that actually it is so easy to make a mistake, and humans are always the weakest link in all of these systems.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to clear that up because this obviously is something that is a doubt in people's minds, and so it's good to be clear on that. But that also brings us on to the second problem of Mark Zuckerberg's this week. Actually, he did lose a sizable amount of money last night, poor chap. But the Senate hearings started today with the whistleblower from Facebook and some strong words in the introductory statements and the first questionings. Stuart, this seems like a bad time for Facebook because very heavy criticisms about how they've been managing the services and looking more towards profits than about people's security issues. What's your take on this whistleblower?
So it's a very deep subject here, right? So I think, you're always going to get in large companies, people who will call out against certain practices. I think that's whistleblowers. There are plenty of whistleblowers out there that across time that have pointed out bad practice, and it gets a lot of news tension. I think for Facebook, this is a particularly bad time with the outage, with other things that have come up this week against Facebook, and talking about not having the due care and attention to protect their users and focusing on monetization of the platform is obviously going to always be a hot topic, and this probably will have some negative consequences against Facebook. Whether this will have any major impact or more impact than, say, the outage would, then that will have to be determined when the full implications of this have actually happened. But I do think there is going to be some thoughts, and like any major kind of story, you usually expect a company to take that away and respond to it, and probably put in place policies and good practice to kind of protect and improve moving forward.
And it seems though that's the goal of the whistleblower. Actually, she said she believes in the potential of Facebook. She doesn't want to hurt Facebook, but she said we could do better. Kevin, where do you see this going? This particular Senate discussion?
I think it will bring about pressure on Facebook. It's hard to know which of the parts that they should have done more on, because at the end of the day, they are a business. They can only hire so many people. They are such a large platform used by most of the planet, really, and and you got all the different languages. So it's really, really hard to be able to, and also taking in political tensions, and there's so much to do, really, to be able to just take in one of the things she brought to light, about the hate speech or being, apolitical, but Facebook get blamed for an awful lot, really, and sometimes the research is just not there. For instance, the obvious one is about teenage mental health, how young people compare themselves, because of Instagram or whatever. Teenagers have been doing that for 1,000 years. Teenagers have to come to know themselves in their teenage years. Facebook is not there. It will be another company doing it. It will be something else again. So we just can't ban one company and say, because someone else will rise up above that. There are platforms people. But what we got to do is always have the regulations. We got to have regulators which keep these companies in rein, because, of course, the bottom line is to make money. But, of course, that's happening around the world. All the governments of the world are coming together and trying to hammer Facebook on so many things. But we just got to be careful and just have a balanced view about how responsible is Facebook in X, Y, or Z.
Right, so there are many questions to be asked, and you're right, it's very easy to see a big target and to attack it. But obviously all these discussions are good, because without discussions nothing changes. But with the particular impact of the outage of yesterday, with some people realizing just how important the Facebook infrastructure is. I mean, we weren't able to communicate internally with our groups because we use WhatsApp for a lot of our messaging. Is it likely that that the goal of this Senate hearing is to break up the business of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, to make it into more manageable sizes? What do you think about that, Stuart?
I don't know whether that is the ultimate goal, and I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I think Facebook does have an extremely large influence in people's daily lives. If you look at, as you mentioned, like Instagram, WhatsApp. We forgot to mention Oculus as well. So lots of people weren't able to play VR games and things like this. There's being able to log into third-party sites that use the ability to log in with Facebook. The impact is very, very wide reaching. So, this could be a potential recommendation or impact. But I think the importance on people, and how they use the platform, and not just the people that use the platform for social media, but how businesses rely on the revenue streams from Facebook is actually quite important to note as well. That a lot of people had lost potential revenue off the back of that outage. So I think there's multiple streams here to kind of analyse, and whether this hearing would bring out those or look to put additional regulation around Facebook and the use of the platform. I know there's been discussions, as Kevin mentioned before. It's getting the balance right, ultimately. The balance between what is a commercial entity and what is also a entity that has a lot of influence and impact on either businesses or individual lives and their privacy, their mental health, and also the commerce side of this as well. I think it's a lot to unpick, and I think this Senate may bring out some of those things, or it may not. And I think we'll have to just wait and see on that front, I'm afraid.
Well, absolutely. It is a very broad subject, and it really came home to roost for everyone, just how much it is a part of our lives and how much we miss it when it's not there, even though maybe we wish it weren't there when it was. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today here on The Edge. Fascinating to hear your perspectives. Thank you. Our tech experts have described the issue as being akin to the social media giant falling off the internet's map, so it could not be found. The company said that there is no evidence that the user data was compromised. However, the outage comes at a particularly difficult time for the company, which is finding itself increasingly under pressure over its reach and impact on society. Coming days will show us more about the impact of the outage. But for now, let's move on to our next topic, discuss the financial crisis in Lebanon. Lebanon, a country that's gone through more than its fair share of crises in the last few years, has been marred by street protests and confrontations for months. Let's have a look at how the situation has deteriorated over the last year alone. Lebanon and the International Monetary Fund are set to hold technical discussions in the coming days to take on the country's dire economic crisis.
Technical discussions between Lebanon and the International Monetary Fund are expected to start in the coming days on policies and reforms that will address its economic and financial crisis. An IMF programme is widely seen as the only way Lebanon can unlock foreign financial help, which it desperately needs to start addressing one of the world's sharpest economic depressions. Economists say that technical talks with the IMF precede any programme negotiations, while Prime Minister Najib Mikati's government has vowed to seek a resumption of IMF negotiations to secure a short and medium-term rescue programme. The Lebanese government said in a statement that Lebanon, which defaulted on its sovereign debt in March last year, is also fully committed to a transparent and equitable debt restructuring process. Talks between Lebanon and the IMF broke down last year, largely because Lebanon's central bank, banks and politicians could not agree with the previous government on the scale of the losses in the financial system.
I'm now joined live from Beirut in Lebanon by Rabi Dandashli, who's the Managing Director of Recode Research Centre and analyst. Rabi, thank you for joining us again here today on The Edge. The Prime Minister Mikati has written to the IMF requesting that negotiations be resumed with the International Monetary Fund. they're going to enter into technical discussions. Two questions to kick off with. What is meant by these technical negotiations, and why has it taken so long for the IMF to be brought back on board?
Okay, first of all, Andy, if we're going to talk about why the technical discussions, Mikati's cabinet has been committed to try and reach out to the IMF, and actually they need a bailout package. The talk started. I think they need to reach out again is because the first approach of Hassan Diab's cabinet, it was pretty much a failure, if we can say, because they had several issues. For example, one of the things that today's cabinet, Mikati's cabinet, have till end of October to fix, there were discrepancies, there were differences between the financial records presented by Central Bank of Lebanon and those presented by Diab's cabinet. One thing to start about. Other thing is commitment to some political reforms and some, let me say, measures that need to be taken by the Lebanese government for the IMF to start its process. So now going back today we are back on track. We've heard that a Zoom meeting was held 2 days ago between the Lebanese delegates and the IMF delegates, and there were some talks related to the participating elements or participating members of the Lebanese delegates, that it should stick to be, let us say, ministers or people from, for example, the governor of the central bank, not consuls, not consultants or advisors of some political entities in Lebanon and political parties. On the other hand, even Mikati has promised to have a more reasonable approach to the financial sector in Lebanon. And by the financial sector, I definitely mean the banking sector, which wasn't the case in Diab's approach. So for many various reasons, it stopped, and now it's back on track because this social economic situation, it's going like a hellfire. What I want to say is, if we want to talk about the numbers today, we have a devalue of the currency by around 90%. We have an annual inflation rate of 158%. The food inflation rate is reaching 550%. So you could imagine how the ordinary person, how the ordinary population in Lebanon is struggling to secure its basic needs. Not to mention poverty rates, which if we went to some, let me say, modest studies about the situation in Lebanon, it reached around 70%, and in other studies it's above 78%.
And many of these problems are exacerbated by the breakdown in the banking system itself, which I assume needs to be put back together before any external funding makes sense for the country. Is that right?
Yeah, because if we went back to the numbers, some estimate the losses of the central bank by approximately $55 billion. And some entity, somewhere, these numbers need to be brought back. These numbers need to be compensated, let me say. And other than political reforms, other than limiting the losses, limiting the expenditure in certain public sector, we can't manage. The central bank can't manage. And when we say the 55 billion, not all of it is the Lebanese government or the Lebanese countries, the Lebanese state money. Most of it or some of it is the Lebanese people, the population, the investors, those who had their monies in the banks, and the banks put it in the central bank. Additional things, in the talks, it was brought that they have this, let me say, window till end of year to finalize these technical talks and these discussions and start putting the plan back on track. But they need commitment. They need commitment, for example, to stop smuggling, to stop not even the smuggling from the borders, to secure the borders and tighten it up on the smugglers, and also to take a commitment to stop the drainage of the monies, the flood of money from Lebanon to the external, to the outside, to abroad. So too many things lays on the shoulders of the Mikati cabinet. He is trying. The new government is trying because there is no other way. They don't have any other source to try and figure out a bailout package, only the IMF. And IMF won't give them the bailout package without having the reforms needed, or at least showing the commitment and willingness to work hand in hand to pass through this situation.
And meanwhile, the people, as you mentioned, the people of Lebanon are still left to struggle. They still have some of their funds tied up in the banks. But is that their life savings, let's say, as an example, well, somebody's left their life savings in the bank, with the currency devaluation, is that now almost obliterated, or after things are put back on track, will they see a recovery? Will the normal average person in Lebanon see a bright future?
I know you like to make it easy for an ordinary person to get the picture, so I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. I'm going to give some estimates. When we say, for example, a $1,000 worth, it's now around $230 to $250 worth. The issue is not in the devaluation itself. It's also about having your money being as ransomed. For some people, they have money, they have savings. So actually on the paper, they are not considered in a poverty state. They are not considered with the less fortunate. But if your money is stuck in a bank and you are allowed to take a very minimized amount of it in the Lebanese pounds, which is now devalued by 90%. So you have to modify your living. You have to modify your living lifestyle to that amount. And to some people, this is, I won't want to say, it is something unexpected. You worked all your life, you took your pension or you took your savings, and they are in the bank, and you put them there like to secure yourself with the interest or with whatever other plans you had in mind. And then you found out one day that all your plans or your retirement plans, and now you're in an age that you can't find a job easily and you can't like make it up. It's already hard. The unemployment rates are like rising like crazy. But in such a day, what would you do? How could you pay your rent? How could you pay the expense to renew your insurance, your medical insurance, your car insurance? I mean, when we say expenses, it's not only the emergency expenses. It's not only on medication. It's not only on, like, some, they have kids abroad. They have their young boys or like they are in universities abroad and they want to send money. Some, they need like to pay the rental fees. They want to repair their cars. So this is one side of it. The other side, we're talking about the needy people who has like low amount of money. It's like ranging from 10K to 50K. What's he's going to do? It's not a saving for the rest of his life. It's a saving for him to survive, to work. Some of them invest in these money, some of them. So you simply just sit. Some quit their jobs. Some like can't afford any more investments. We're talking about small businesses now. Small businesses now can't sustain, can't continue in such a situation.
And this is something which must be addressed by McCarthy's government and all those involved.
Today, McCarthy made a promise, like a couple of days ago, last week, he made a promise that he saw that, you know, those people putting their money, the savings, which is like below $70,000, $80,000 and below, he said that he's going to work because they must have to take their money back in the state they have saved it in, like in fresh dollars if they were saved in fresh dollars, or in Lebanese pound if they were in Lebanese pound. But it is promise. It is like easily said than done. But the population don't have but to be wishful and to hope that McCarthy will be able to do something for them. The issue now of people having like amounts larger than 500,000, larger than 1, 2, 3 million or $10 million. And here we're taking haircut is the only situation on the table today. They could afford the haircut. Is it fair? We don't know. But they can afford the haircut. But as it for the medium and low savers, it is not an option for them to have a haircut. It's already done by the devaluation of the currency.
And and for those people, there's no time to put things right. Rabi, unfortunately, we also have run out of time for today. Thank you so much. I do hope that the discussions lead to a fruitful future. Thank you for joining us. Lebanon has been in crisis since late 2019. Since then, the currency has lost some 90% of its value, as Rabi just explained to us. Poverty has soared and the banking system has been paralysed. The economy minister says that the banking sector, central bank and other players in the financial system are working to agree on the size of the losses and how they should be distributed. Coming weeks will show if the parties can agree on a beneficial plan to bring Lebanon out of the crisis. Now let's move on to our final topic to discuss the United Nations reports on Libya. On the 5th of February, Libya's rival political groups agreed in UN-mediated talks to form an interim unity government to lead the country to elections this December. Our following infographic explains the process. After a decade of civil strife in Libya, the country hopes to come closer to closing one of the darkest chapters of its history with the release of a United Nations report into crimes against humanity committed during the years of turmoil.
Investigators commissioned by the United Nations top human rights body has reportedly evidence of possible crimes against humanity and war crimes in Libya. Many of the alleged crimes were committed against civilians and migrants detained in the country while trying to get to Europe.
Our investigations have established that all parties to the conflicts, including third state, foreign fighters, and mercenaries, have violated international humanitarian law, in particular the principle of proportionality and distinction, and some have also committed war crime.
The report is the first from a fact-finding mission commissioned by the Human Rights Council. It includes accounts of murder, torture, enslavement, extrajudicial killings, and rape. Its release could be a signal to international powers like Russia and France to reassess their policies and support some of the war's parties. Libya has been in turmoil for a decade, with the last several years seeing war between forces backing UN-recognized government based in the east and warlord Khalifa Haftar's forces based in the west, supported by regional powers, foreign fighters, and mercenaries.
Indeed, our investigations have indicated that there are foreign fighters, there are mercenaries in Libya, and they have not yet left the territory of Libya as required. I think that in particular, our investigations have indicated that there are individuals associated with Shivik Wagner, which is a private military company from Russia.
I'm now joined live from Tunisia by Jonathan Fenton-Harvey, who's a Middle East analyst. Jonathan, welcome back to The Edge. The Human Rights Council conducted a fact-finding mission and it's been released as a UN report. What can you tell us about the findings of the crimes against humanity in Libya?
One of the important points about this report is that it does address what has been obvious to many observers of Libya's war, that there have been grave human rights violations committed. For example, it did quite rightly name that there were bad incidents such as the recruitment of child soldiers, torture, and other abuses like that. But it's one of the shortcomings of the report that I think needs to be stressed is that it hasn't named any particular candidate as responsible for the abuses in Libya. Obviously, it has been clear that Haftar's forces have targeted civilians and there have been many more abuses that have accompanied its offensive. But at the same time, it hasn't directly named that. There have been some small signposts towards this, such as it mentioned that there were mass graves found in the city of Tahuna, which is near Tripoli and was a Haftar stronghold. So it mentioned that, and particularly it is important because a Haftar-aligned militia was found to have been responsible for that. But at the same time, it hasn't gone further than that. It's just named a couple of isolated incidents that could have been tied to Haftar's forces. So if this could be a stepping stone at least, I think one positive we could see from this is that it could lead to a deeper investigation. But there are still drawbacks which are largely related to the international community's role and what it can really do, because this is largely become an internationalized conflict, a globalized one, with external powers playing more of a significant role. So this needs to be addressed more.
Indeed, on both sides of the conflict, there have been several countries involved, with Russia, France, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates on the one hand supporting Khalifa Haftar, and on the other, Turkey backing the recognised government of national accord. So this is a very complicated situation. One of the groups that I understand was being highlighted in this was the Wagner Group. What can you tell us about that? Did you notice that in the report?
Yes, I mean, even then it did not substantially call out Russia's role significantly. Of course, as you quite rightly mentioned, the Wagner Group has been a key actor in supplying mercenaries in Libya, and they've recruited many from like Syria and African states as well. So that's been quite a significant issue. Although it's important to note, even if the UN does kind of condemn abuses in Libya, that's as likely as far as it would go, because even though the UN can say, oh, mercenaries should withdraw from Libya and there should be a pull-out of that, who sits on the UN Security Council is Russia and France, who are also two of the main actors, external actors involved in Libya's conflict, or they have been. Mm-hmm. So if there is any further development, one of the biggest threats I see of this is that Russia or France could veto any resolution which could take these positive findings further. So at the same time, the United States, I don't think it's taken a substantially convincing leadership role in Libya, which would be important. From Donald Trump's presidency until Joe Biden's current administration, there have been some signs that Biden may support peace initiatives, but it hasn't been any more significant than that. And there has been an announced gradual withdrawal of mercenaries as well. That was announced recently by Libya's foreign minister, or the foreign minister of the transitional government, the government of national unity. So there would need to be more addressing of this as well, because as you quite rightly mentioned, this is one of the external dynamics that has made Libya's conflict more complex and therefore difficult to address.
And your reference to the possibility of France and Russia vetoing anything on the UN Security Council just highlights the need for that body to be reformed, as the Turkish president was suggesting at the UNGA just recently. This report, of course, is just one report, and is one look at the crimes that have been committed over the last years, possibly by both sides, but particularly by Khalifa Haftar's troops. Do you see that this will lead in due course towards criminal charges for any individuals or groups? or will more research need to be done?
Yeah, I definitely think there needs to be more targeted research on actors that may have been involved in war crimes, because this is still just a beginning step. It's more of a stepping stone towards something that could be more conclusive. So I think if at the same time we could look at what other organisations have said. I mean, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have highlighted many of these abuses that have been carried out by Haftar's forces in particular in Libya. And so I think the evidence is clear what has actually occurred. It would just need more wider international support to carry it out. And as mentioned before, any of the countries on the UN Security Council could pass a resolution for stricter actions in Libya, but at the same time other countries would like to block it as well, because many countries have been involved in the conflict in Libya. So I think it is up to the international community or the powers that sit on the UN Security Council to allow this. But at the same time, I don't think they would like to renounce any of their own influence, particularly France and Russia. France has said that it would like to host a conference for the presidential elections in November. But that does indicate that France would like to secure some kind of influence in the country, and particularly maybe even
which is a
in the East.
particular tactic France is focusing on at the moment, isn't it? To obviously looking to boost its own domestic needs. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for the programme today. Thank you so much for your perspective on this report. It's very important that any crimes that have been committed be fully investigated, and no doubt we'll be talking about this again before long. Thank you for joining us today. Libya has been in turmoil for a decade, with the last several years seeing war between forces backing UN-recognised government based in the east and Muammar Khalifa Haftar's forces based in the west, supported by regional powers, foreign fighters and mercenaries. We hope that such crimes will not happen again in the future. Our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story, shared with the hashtag #FacebookDown. And here's what you had to say about Facebook Down on Twitter. Mnenech Sandile says, "Yo, can someone explain what was happening with WhatsApp, Facebook and Instagram yesterday? And also, how did Mark lose money after outage?" Khaled Al-Najjar says, "One of many maintenance tries which tested yesterday. Source is unreliable." Just kidding. Hope we've learned something after those 6 hours of global chaos caused by Facebook Down. And Nikki Tixon says, "Instagram and Facebook were down yesterday. Google is down today. It's time for, books and paper and pencils and discussions and read-alouds. And let's now take a look at our video of the day, which tells the story of a Syrian refugee chemistry teacher who's using social media to bring his lessons to students.
وقف الدوام 25 الشهر، فأنا حاولت إني أقدر أساعد الطلاب بطريقة ثانية. أنشأت حساب على اليوتيوب وبلشت أصور دروس. في الإمكاناتي موبايل وحامل موبايل وأقلام. قدرت أخلص المنهاج تقريبا بأقل من شهر ونصف. طبعا أنا دائما بتواصل مع طلابي، عندي جروبات على الواتساب، عندي جروبات على الفايبر. مرات بنص الليل ساعة واحدة ساعة تنتين الطلاب يتصلوا فيني وأجاوبهم.
الواحد لما يقرأ لحاله ما بتوصل الفكرة ولازمها أستاذ يشرح منيح. درست كتير منيح، جمعت بمادة الكيمياء 86.
والطلاب استفادوا كتير حتى لو الحظر وحتى لو الظروف مو كويسة. الحمد والشكر لله، الله ساعدنا.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.